So Nevin, I'll just go through my first few slides and then pass to you, and you can do whatever. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's great, Will. Thanks. I just would like to also acknowledge that another one of our chapter authors is here,
Yeah.
Dr. Denise Mitten, who wrote a critical perspectives chapter for the book. So just wanted to give you kudos there, Denise, for your
Yeah.
work. It's a great chapter. Recently reread. I love it.
Yeah. I actually read it this week too, so I'm stoked you're here, Denise. Um,
Thank
so yeah, with this book, weirdly enough, Nevin and I were both at a International Adventure Therapy Conference in Denver in 2015. And we actually didn't meet at that conference, but we started Skyping back and forth and brainstorming ideas. Nevin was pretty busy with his nature-based therapy book at the time. And then this idea sort of came to fruition, and we started making a list of all these different therapies and things like that. This is us, which that doesn't really matter, just so you know. So we made this list of all these different therapies, and what we noticed is we went, oh, wilderness therapy. Hey, we know these epic Norwegians doing wilderness therapy in this interesting way. Let's see if they'll do a chapter. You know, we know Denise, who has been writing about critical perspectives and decolonization and providing a really strong feminist critique of outdoor therapies and adventure education. And we thought, that's perfect. Let's do this. And so putting this list together, we thought, oh my gosh, we actually have a bit of a book here. And like all edited books, one of the really fascinating things was this motley crew of people that we got together to contribute, represented by a lot of different countries. It's Norway, Belgium, United States, Canada, Australia, Korea. I don't know which ones I'm missing here. I think that's about right. And also people from all different backgrounds, from social workers, psychologists, counselors, marriage family therapists, and they talked about all different these kind of common fields of practice of just taking therapy outside. And one of the unique things, and I think the real honor to present to this group, is that one of the threads that came with this book that maybe differentiates it a bit from other sort of your adventure therapy or wilderness therapy texts was, I guess, taking seriously the eco-psychology perspective, how we view the environment. And this is what Nevin will talk about, the human nature kinship, and also taking indigenous ways of knowing, land-based pedagogies, the critical perspectives that Denise added. There are also threads that went all the way through the book as well. So happy to chat about it as always, and I'll pass over to Nevin as well, who was the brainchild of the whole thing.
Thanks, Will. Interestingly enough, Will and I didn't actually discuss specifically what I was going to talk about, so I'm just going to wing it, but with conviction, of course. I think the segue, Thomas, that you're talking about is probably one of the maybe less touched upon aspects of our book, but also maybe one of the less acknowledged parts of our work, is this fact that we are working outdoors. That was one of the three common threads that brought all of these practices together. And it's inherent that we're paying attention to the environment. It's inherent that we're obviously affected by changes in weather patterns and seasonality and topography and the places that we travel and work with our clients. We don't spend a lot of time, and nor did many of our authors in our book, talking specifically about climate change, but we do talk about reciprocal relationships with nature. And at least in the one eco-psychology chapter, there is a conversation about the relationship between human health and environmental health, which obviously touches on both environmental issues and human issues. And I think most of our authors would, if asked directly, would say, yes, there's obviously a direct connection. We're constantly being affected by changes in weather patterns, by changes in the environmental degradation, those things that have occurred over time. The concepts of generational amnesia, and the fact that each generation sees some level of degradation, but we don't necessarily get to see the whole picture. And that's common, especially when working in environments that are changing. And one of the experiences that I've had in the last number of years in working outdoors in the summertime in the province of British Columbia, just up north of Thomas in Oregon, is what's now a regular seasonal fire season. And having a place like where we live on Vancouver Island, which is quite restricted in terms of the number of roads and places you can go, when fires do happen, there's actually no exit points. There's no way for us to get the population of the people out of harm's way. And so when there's dark clouds, when there's a red orb of a sun showing up in the morning, it's more than obvious to everyone the emotional impact that has upon us. And so when we are working with people outdoors, we are paying attention to our own personal relationship with the environment as well as that of our clients. And we're trying, in effect, to assist our clients in building a stronger relationship with the environment. And by doing so, it becomes a resource, and not as in a resource to be extracted, but a resource to be in relationship with. And so one of those three pillars of the Outdoor Therapies book was human and nature kinship. And we drew upon the language of Robin Wall Kimmerer, for those who are familiar with her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She's an Indigenous scholar as well as a biologist, and she's also a poetic writer. And if you haven't read the book, I strongly suggest you get a copy of it. It was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And her notion of kinship is a nice framing for our relationship with nature, in that we're just simply a species within, and if the environments aren't healthy, then how can we be healthy within them? And most of our authors in the different chapters, they find a way to touch on this in some manner in their text. Will, you should be feeding me some direction here, and I would like to spend more time in dialogue with people. I prefer to be in a dialogue rather than presenting ideas. I'm just taking a note here from Thomas. Climate change.
Yeah, I mean, I can just dialogue as well. I mean, I just think it's just worth noting that climate change is this hyper object. It's this huge issue, and even among integrative folks that are already working in outdoor therapy, which itself is integrative and quite open, it's still yet another leap. It's like another leap to bring in yet another whole world of meanings and practically understanding the research and understanding the narratives. It's a huge leap. So it's not meant to diminish your work, but it's a challenge, and so it's important to note it's not that easy to bring this in. It sort of fades into the background. But also, Nevin and Will, I think it would be helpful. I mean, I'm aware of this world, but some of the folks on our call are not at all, I think, aware of outdoor therapy and some of these histories and some of these different flavors. So it might be good also to just give a little overview of what is in the book, because I think it's going to be helpful for people.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And Will had often, I mean, he's already named some of the types of therapies that are involved in the book, but if I can just take a kind of a snapshot of, there's Will's got the chapters up, but just some of the expressions of this practice. I mean, some are related directly to our relationship with other species. Both our animal assisted and equine therapy folks. And there's a multitude of ways and numbers of expressions of what that practice actually looks like, from riding of horses for therapeutic purposes to just simply sharing space and being in an equitable relationship with the horse. So there's so much that we learned as editors of this book just from simply editing and helping rewrite most of these chapters. Some of them are hard to distinguish because there's not that much difference between them if you were just to look at the practice. the first section of the book was based on what are things that are foundational to our practice. And again, they may be foundational to a lot of people's practices, but Thomas and I opened with an introduction, which was kind of to set the stage for the book and the context of the book and who was included in it. And that's where we had these sort of three pillars: that our work is place-based, just primarily outdoors, but it's often in natural, less manipulated, less damaged environments, as natural of an environment or spaces that we can spend time in. That most of our activities and most of these practices in the book are activity-based, or at least engage our bodies in a visceral level. So there's some level of active engagement in the practice, more obvious in some than others. The concepts of ecopsychology we used as one of the foundational chapters to speak of that environmental health, human health relationship between the two, which sets and establishes sort of a tone for the book in terms of its relationship to the environment. We provided I'm just going to go through them here. Like chapter 4, we have a number of programs, large programs, national programs serving hundreds of thousands of people across different populations through just outdoor education or adventure education. These are programs that are using outdoor skills-based activities. They may be using some level of risk or challenge. The camps, that are serving kids and families throughout the year. The understanding of what are some basic psychological first aid concepts for them to be able to identify and respond appropriately if there are, mental health concerns. And then chapter 5 was written by a colleague of mine who's a chief of a local First Nations, and he's also a new professor in our school at the University of Victoria. And he works with traditional knowledge, with elders and with knowledge keepers in the region, with local First Nations, and is a land-based pedagogist as far as his, if you were to put an academic title on himself. And so he provided a perspective on what land-based healing looks like from a local perspective here on Vancouver Island. We also put that in the foundations chapter and not as one of the quote unquote practices. We didn't want to diminish it into a modality or an approach, but hope that we can learn from that and have that as part of our common expression of the base of a lot of our work. Because the majority of these practices in part 2 are not necessarily new. We're not necessarily seeing or doing anything that's innovative or magical here. We're talking about people being outdoors, being active in the outdoors, and doing often very meaningful things like traveling from one point to another, which may include being burdened by carrying a pack, or traveling in a canoe, or growing food, or caring and tending to animals that we're in relationship with. And some of it is a little more recreational based, and I think surf therapy is one of those that could easily be put into that category. But each of these practices through the second part of the book all have a body of literature. They all have some level of defined practice. Most of them have some type of professional group, and a number of them already have like international certifying bodies for practitioners within them. And so as these all exist in isolation, our intention was to at least try to cluster and bring them together under these three ideas that we're place-based, that we're bodily active, engaged, and that we are in kinship with nature. And then, of course, we couldn't finish the book without having a couple chapters at least talking about some of the critical perspectives. And that's where Dr. Mitten here has provided chapter 14 for us, where she's done her wonderful writing and taken a good swing at some of the common historical practices that are pretty practiced uncritically within our field with some of these ideas. And I'm not going to get into very specific details on that, but I do appreciate the fact that at least for our wilderness therapy, adventure therapy folks within the literature, that this is yet another chapter for them to look at some of their practices and say, oh yeah, maybe we are doing that. And then we wrap the book up with Will and a colleague of his from Portland. Is it doctor yet? At least yes. Daniel Cavanaugh. He is? Is he done?
Cavanaugh. Yep, he's done.
Daniel Kavanaugh. Just kind of taking a snapshot at the book and looking at it from a summative perspective, and then also looking forward in terms of what next and what do we do with this. And I think in completing the book, one of my first and foremost concerns is that as soon as it gets out there, we're going to find out what we missed. So surely there are other practices. I know there's a large group of Italians now doing climbing therapy. So, maybe in a few years, there'll be another chapter on that front. I'm sure there are other angles to this work that, even from this group's perspective, like the work within the APA around climate change and sustainability and mental health, like that alone, I'm sure someone could capture enough ideas around practice and what does that look like for you as practitioners. And then maybe just to conclude is that as much as there's chapters, there's also so much overlap. I'm a practitioner here locally. I keep 4 or 5 clients on my workload just to remain relevant to my students in the classroom, as well as providing service where it's needed. But I sometimes go on trips, so I might be doing wilderness therapy. Sometimes I'm doing sensory awareness activities in a forest, so maybe I'm doing forest therapy. And at times I might go, engage with some colleagues that climb or take a group canoeing, and then I'm doing adventure therapy. And we do go to a local therapeutic farm with our clients, and we do work with small animals. So there's like equine and animal assisted therapy. And we don't really have a huge surf culture here on the island, but at some point I'm hoping one of my students gets excited enough about it to start a surf therapy program, so I can also bring my clients along and get some surfing in. And when I say that, I get a little bit of, it sparks a little bit of joy in me that this is the work that I do, because this is self-care for us as practitioners. If I feel drained at the end of the day sitting in my office because I'm staring at a screen, I'm more than happy to spend time on Fridays, tomorrow, with my clients in a local park, because it's rejuvenating for me. Like it recharges my batteries as well. And if I can help my clients recognize that they too can recharge their batteries by being active outdoors, then what I'm doing is I'm turning them on to a resource that's available to them, hopefully 24/7. It's accessible and it's affordable as long as the environment around them supports it. If they're in a 30th floor apartment building in New York City, then this is something that's going to be harder to get as a resource in their life. But it's also a way to definitely move someone into a relationship with the environment that allows them to recognize change. And if they're recognizing change, then they're probably also becoming more aware of the weather patterns on a daily basis, the seasonal changes. A lot of our activities are based on going back to the same place, so that they really have some place identity with that space. A lot of our immigrant population, when we work in natural spaces, they're able to make connections between what they're learning about this environment and their home environment where they came from. And with that comes a certain amount of sense of self, because they are gaining some level of confidence in having a sense of place. So, I think I could ramble on for another hour now that I got rolling, but I don't want to. I'd rather, again, be in dialogue, and I want to flip this back to Will, because I'm sure you've got something to add, and then we can maybe move towards a forum of questions.
Yeah, like Nevin said, each of those different practices we saw in the table of contents comes with their own body of theory, of ideas about mechanisms of change for clients, and some body of research as well. And each of those provide a case vignette about working with a specific group or clientele. One of the things going towards the end to our critical perspectives is, like all things psychotherapy, all of these outdoor therapies are also up against the cognitive behavioral tsunami, right? We're all, sorry, my phone was ringing, it's distracting me. We are trying to continue to advocate for this idea that we can take therapy outdoors and be just as effective as sitting on the couch. And one thing that Nevin said that I think is a really helpful idea for when we do open the counseling room door and take people outdoors is if we take them to a nearby creek and have some real, this person experiences some sort of symptom relief, they can go back to that creek whenever they want. And so instead of having to book your next session to come see the therapist in my office or sit on the couch behind me, we're actually opening some extra avenues for what they can go do to experience some sort of benefit, and things like that. I think what is really interesting about this book, and I think that comes from the Foundations chapter and Denise Mitten's edition as well, that there's even though it's an introductory text, sort of reintroducing these practice frameworks that have been around for a long time, threading it with critical perspectives and with indigenous pedagogies and indigenous ways of knowing, decolonizing perspectives, and the whole notion of the human nature kinship is something that is fairly new to, I know, being pretty embedded in adventure therapy. We often get very focused on techniques. Go rock climbing, go scuba diving, as we've been talking about, play this game with that client. And we're at risk of losing that focus of how we're experiencing the environment that we're in. And that's where we can get the sort of, we're climbing this mountain, we're dominating the natural environment, which is something we can tend to do on our own anyway. So I think that thread throughout the whole book made it a bit unique as far as what I think Nevin and I had read previously about these fields of practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put.
Maybe we can move to our small group briefly and then open it up larger. I'd like to give maybe Denise a chance to speak a little bit. I know people are probably sitting on some questions.
Yeah.
So maybe about 5 minutes of just some small group check-ins, and then, really encourage people to either directly bring up questions or use the chat. Does that sound okay right now?
Yeah, that's great.
Totally.
All right, let's do that and see where people are